Hi, and welcome to the second and final session covering fractions. In the first part we covered some terminology and the basic concepts required when looking to solve problems involving fractions. In this session we will look at adding, multiplying, dividing and subtracting fractions. So let's begin. There are 4 steps to follow when adding or subtracting two fractions. The first 2 steps are required only if the fractions to be added or subtracted have different denominators. This being the case, find the lowest common multiple of both denominators and multiply the top and bottom of each fraction separately so that they remain equivalent, but also so the outcome is that the two fractions have the same denominator. Next, add or subtract the numerators and put this number over the shared denominator. And finally, simplify the fraction if necessary. Let's have a look at a couple of examples. Example 1 shows two fractions that have the same denominator, therefore steps 1 and 2 are not required. Jumping to step 3, we add the two numerators, which gives 10, and put this over the shared denominator of 15. As the numerator and denominator share a common factor of 5, we can simplify and rewrite the fraction as 2 over 3. Subtracting fractions is similar to adding fractions with the exception that for step 2, instead of adding the numerators together, you subtract them. In the second example, we are asked to subtract 1 over 6 from 8 over 15. Let's begin by looking at step 1, which is finding the lowest common multiple of the two denominators. In the previous video, part 1, we looked at how to find the lowest common multiple of a pair of numbers. Using the method discussed, we find here that the lowest common multiple is 30. Therefore, for step 2, we make both fractions have a denominator of 30 by multiplying the top and bottom of the first fraction by 2 and the top and bottom of the second fraction by 5. As can be seen on the screen, the original sum becomes 16 over 30 minus 5 over 30. Following the third step, we get the answer 11 over 30. Step 4 is not required as the fraction is already in its simplest form. Now let's have a look at adding and subtracting mixed fractions. It's worth mentioning that mixed fractions represent a whole number and a fraction. For example, when you see 5 1/4 written down, this really means 5 plus a quarter. When adding or subtracting mixed numbers, you add or subtract the whole numbers and the fractions separately. This is best shown by example. Consider the sum 3 3/8 plus 4 2/8. This can be written as 3 plus 3/8 plus 4 plus 2/8, and then rearranging the order of addition, we have 3 plus 4 and 3/8 plus 2/8. By adding the whole numbers together and adding the fractions together using the method described in the previous slide, we get 7 5/8. Example 2 uses the same method as example 1, only here the fractions to be added together have different denominators. Again, using the same method as example 1, the method discussed in the previous slide for adding fractions with different denominators and then simplifying, the result we arrive at is the answer 5.5. Now let's have a look at multiplying fractions. There are 4 steps to follow when multiplying two fractions together. The first step involves cancelling any values where possible. For example, if the first fraction has a 3 on the top and the second fraction has a 3 on the bottom, these can be cancelled to make 1. After carrying out any available cancellations, multiply the top numbers together to make the numerator and the bottom numbers together to make the denominator. Finally, in the last step, we simplifying the resulting fraction if necessary. Let's have a look at a couple of examples. Firstly, here we have the two fractions 3 over 4 and 5 over 9. We can start by cancelling the 3 and the 9 as shown on screen. Then step 2 and 3 tell us to multiply the top numbers to make the numerator and the bottom numbers to make the denominator. This gives us the fraction 5 over 12, which is already in its simplest form, so step 4 is not necessary. In this second example, we are asked to multiply the fractions 4 over 5 and 6 over 8. As before, carry out steps 1 to 3, cancelling any values where possible, and then multiply the top numbers and then the bottom numbers. This time we have the fraction 6 over 10, and these numbers share a common factor of 2, and therefore, simplifying, we get the result 3 over 5. In order to divide a fraction, we multiply the first fraction by the reverse of the second fraction. In other words, we reverse the second fraction, change the sign, and then carry out the same steps as followed when multiplying fractions. Example 1 shows how to divide 2/7 by 3/5. Firstly, reverse the second fraction, and then change the divide sign to multiply. Then we multiply the top numbers to get the numerator, and the bottom numbers to get the denominator. Here we end up with 10 over 21, which cannot be simplified any further. Before looking at the second example, we need to look at converting an improper fraction into a mixed number. To do this, firstly we split the fraction out into as many whole multiples of the denominator as possible and the remaining part. So for 15 over 8, we have one multiple of 8, which we write as 8 over 8, and the leftover part is 7 over 8. This can then be written as 1 7/8. We can split 23 over 8 into two multiples of 8, giving 16 over 8 plus the remaining part of 7/8, which is equivalent to 2 7/8. For the second example, we have 3 over 4 divided by 2 over 5. Following the same steps as in example 1, we get the fractions 15 over 8. This is an improper fraction and can be written as a mixed number using the method we just looked at, giving us an answer 1 7/8. To multiply mixed fractions, firstly convert the mixed fraction into an improper fraction, then multiply the fractions together as before. For example, to multiply 1 1/3 by 2 1/5, convert the fractions to 4/3 and 11/5 respectively, and then multiply the top numbers to give the numerator and then the bottom numbers to give the denominator, which in this case gives 44 over 15, which can be simplified to 2 14/15. To divide mixed fractions, firstly convert the mixed fractions into improper fractions, then divide the fractions as shown earlier. Consider 2 2/5 divided by 4/13. First convert the fractions to improper fractions, then reverse the second fraction. Before multiplying the fractions together, we can carry out some cancellation. The resultant multiplication of numerators and denominators gives 39 over 5, which can then be simplified to 7 4/15.